Hello everyone. Today I will be discussing the definition of life, specifically the Ayn Rand definition, and the goal will be to figure out whether it makes sense. Now, this is a continuation of really previous discussion on free will, which I just recorded, but you don't have to watch it. This could be watched independently. So yeah, let's start with a general question. How to define life? If you ever thought about it, you probably know the standard biological definition. And as you know, it's probably, well, it's kind of ugly, right? See, in biology, life is not defined by a single concise sentence, but rather by a set of key traits and processes. Living organism is generally recognized by its capacity for metabolism, homeostasis, growth, reproduction, response to stimuli, and evolution. Here they are, all these factors. Cellular organization. All known life forms are made of one or more cells, which are the basic units of structure and function. Metabolism. Living things undergo chemical reactions to convert nutrients into energy and discard waste. Homeostasis. Organisms regulate the internal environment to maintain a stable, constant state, such as body temperature. Growth and development. Living things increase in size or change complexity over time following instructions contained in their genetic materials. Okay. Reproduction. Organisms can create new organisms similar to themselves, passing down genetic traits. A response to stimuli. Living things react to changes in the external and internal environment. And evolution. Populations of living organisms change over generations through natural selection and adaptation. So as you could see, it's a definition through like a bunch of characteristics. And they're not, the division is not really essentialized. It's not clear which characteristics of these two is essential, on which most of us depend on, right? And as usual with these kind of definitions, there are some exceptions and edge cases which don't quite fit some of these characteristics. Um, so ideally, we want to have something more concise and at the same time universal. The question is it possible to do something like this? And today I'll be discussing the proposal made by a philosopher, Ayn Rand, which is like a candidate for this role. So I took this definition just from some kind of Ayn Rand quotes website. So let me just read for you. It's excerpts, how do you call it? Quotes from her book. Okay, let me read the first one. There is only one fundamental alternative to the universe, existence or non-existence, and it pertains to a single class of entities, to living organisms. The existence of inanimate matter is unconditional. The existence of life is not. It depends on a specific course of action. Matter is indestructible, it changes its form, but it cannot cease to exist. It is only a living organism that faces a constant alternative, the issue of life or death. Life is a process of self-sustaining and self-generated action. So this line is really a definition. But I want to read you the full quote so that you could put it into context. Okay, so I'll continue. If an organism fails in that action, it dies. Its chemical elements remain, but its life goes out of existence. It is only the concept of life that makes the concept of value possible. It is only to a living entity that things can be good or evil. Okay, so let's just continue. I'll read, I think, all of them. Not that many, so that we could just make sure you understand correctly, because there's several terms she used here, and in the later paragraph she'll explain what she means by them. Okay. Only a living entity can have goals or can originate them. It is only a living organism that has the capacity for self-generated, goal-directed action. On the physical level, the functions of all living organisms, from the simplest to the most complex, from the nutritive function in a single cell of an amoeba to the blood circulation in the body of man, are actions generated by the organism itself and directed to a single goal, the maintenance of the organism's life. Okay, so here she explains what self-generated means. An organism's life depends on two factors: the material or fuel which it needs from the outside, from its physical background, and the action of its own body, the action of using the fuel properly. What standard determines what is proper in this context? The standards is the organism's life, or that which is required for the organism's survival. Okay. Now another quote. When applied to physical phenomena, such as the automatic functions of an organism, the term goal-directed is not to be taken to mean purposive, a concept applicable only to the actions of consciousness, and is not to imply the existence of any teleological principle operating in insentient nature. I use the term goal-directed in this context to designate the fact that the automatic functions of living organisms are actions whose nature is such that they result in the preservation of organism's life. Okay, so here she explained what she means by goal-directed. It doesn't mean that it's actually teleological, that it actually has a purpose, or that neither, I guess, that the organisms had a choice. Yeah, this is not very clear. But I think this is very important because the examples which I could consider today will be mostly from inanimate nature. So it seems like she agrees that at least oh, sorry, the examples which I consider will be just simple organisms which don't have consciousness. Yeah, how you call them? I forgot. Insentient organisms. Yeah. So for them, we could see what the goals are and whether such things as goals even exist. Yeah, but I think she maintained the concept of purpose for conscious life. Okay, and the last quote. In the fundamental sense, stillness is the antithesis of life. Life can be kept in existence only by a constant process of self-sustaining action. The goal of that action, the ultimate value which to be kept, must begin through its very moment, its organism's life. Yeah, so that's kind of all we have here. Now I want to just go through simple examples and see whether this will work and how is it applied to living organisms. Okay. So which living organism is really the simplest? I guess we have to go back to the beginning of life, and there are a lot of unanswered questions there. So we don't actually know how life exactly started, but the most dominant theory is called an RNA world hypothesis. So in other words, life starts with one RNA molecule. So it's like a draw like this, like a single stranded long chain of nucleotides, right? Of 4 types. So each of these could be 1 out of 4 nucleotides and could be, very long. So these molecules were just, floating this primordial bouillon, just like any other molecules, right? What makes them anyhow alive? We see nothing really yet, but they have this property. If we have correct type of matter floating around. In other words, the same things with these molecules made of. So in other words, like it's a simple sugar and this nucleotides, also simple molecules. What happens is that these nucleotides will attach to this strand and start forming like a mirror copy of initial RNA. And then the second strand could be separated from the first one, and the process can repeat. And after it is repeated twice, we are getting back the same RNA molecule. So instead of one RNA molecule, we now have 2. So we already have multiplication, which is like the first attribute of life. But can we say that these molecules' actions are self-generated? Actions generated by the organism itself. Yeah, and direct to a single goal, the maintenance of organism's life. Yeah, it seems like this notion wouldn't quite apply to DNA or RNA molecule. What does it mean, right? There's just this different base pairs joining together, right? There's just new chemicals stuck on it, just according to the laws of physics. So let's then make a step forward, because of course RNA molecule is not usually considered alive, even according to like a standard definition of life. Now the next step is probably the evolution of cellular, or in this case maybe nuclear membrane, because there is no nucleus yet. That's somewhat simple, because you have the lipids floating around, and the lipids, they naturally form this kind of bubbles. In water, because they're hydrophobic. The one side of a lipid molecule is hydrophobic, so it pushes water out, if you look closely at what's happening here, you have this lipid molecule, right? And just stuck like this. The hydrophobic sides out, and the second layer on the opposite direction. So that's usually, oh wait, you can see. That's really the how the cellular membrane look like. Yeah. Okay, so now it just so happened that some of the RNA could end up being inside this lipid nanoparticle. And now the RNA which is inside of it is more well protected from some, destructive external factors which could threaten the existence of RNA molecule. For example, heat, right? In other words, something fast-moving bumps into it, another molecule, protein or something, and destroys it, right? So this lipid bubbles will protect it. Now, of course, those those RNA molecules which are surrounded by the bubbles allowing or necessarily nutrients getting inside will be able to replicate better, right? So in the end, the concentration will increase over all others. And then soon, most of your main RNA will be inside those kind of bubbles. So you could say this is like really, really a proto cell. Now, well, you could say, does it have metabolism? And yeah, I still don't know. Whether this concept applies to it. But we could just make several steps forward. The next big thing is interaction with proteins. Proteins, they work as catalysis of reactions which could be important for RNA, could speed up its multiplication process. For example, they could serve multiple good functions. So if RNA is surrounded by good proteins, it will last longer. So you could say some proteins are pro-life. And eventually, yeah, I mean, it's kind of surprising maybe, but RNAs or the proto cells somehow evolved ribosomes and the ability to generate their own proteins. So the ribosome is literally a translator from the language of nucleotides, right? The RNA. To the language of amino acids. As you probably know, there's like 24 basic amino acids. Amino acids is the building blocks for proteins. So really inside ribosome, we have this translating mechanism which reads the three neighboring base pair. Case this case is not a pair, and then assigns a corresponding amino acids to them. So the translation is, 3 nucleotides encode 1 amino acid. And that's how we build protein. Now, if you have proteins, yeah, and they could also actually be stuck between the lipids on this cellular membrane and form simple receptors. It's like this. Oh, I try to draw a protein. And they could make this membrane like more smart. They could control which things could enter it and which could not enter it. For example, and as we'll see in a second, they could serve even more complicated functions. At some point, by the way, the DNA evolves, right? So DNA is really like a double strand molecule from start, right? And then it's even more robust. It's hard to destroy, and really it is now used as storage of genetic information. And when you want to copy it, you open it up, and then you copy it on RNA first, complementary RNA, and then you use this RNA to go to generate protein. So all those functions evolve somehow gradually, plus you at some point evolve some energy source of a cell, but this probably happened way later. Usually they use some kind of energy just from outside. So you now could ask, does this qualify as a self-generated action? It's clear that this is just simple chemical laws here at play, right? As Rand said, is some automatic processes. Well, they would appear self-generated if you don't like know exactly what's happening, but actually the cell forms somehow out of parts of the environment, right? And it's just the environment continues to interact with it in a certain way, and just the internal parts of it are quite complicated. want to consider even a further step. So we want to increase the complexity to make, this organism look more alive. We'll look at bacteria, simplest bacteria, and the way bacteria moves. I had somewhere here. Like a picture. So yeah, bacteria actually can move. Draw bacteria first. It has its tails. It moves using what's called Flagellar motor. It's really just a tiny electric motor, and I'll show you maybe a video how it works.
One of the most efficient motors in the world. Many types of bacteria are actually propelled by flagellum filaments, driven by a novel rotary motor. Membrane rings make up the rotor, and ions interact between the stator and the rotor to generate torque. This converts electrochemical to mechanical energy with almost 100% efficiency. A slight change in the position of a protein can change the direction of rotation, but a protein can also be used as a mechanical clutch to disengage the motor from the rotor. The rotor can rotate up to 18,000 RPM, but with the filament attached, it only gets around 200 to 1,000 RPM. In translation, it can move roughly 60 cell lengths per second. Ultimately, understanding this natural machine could lead to advances in biological technology. Ironically, nature.
Yeah, so maybe another one.
Mechanical structure but a super engine crafted by nature. It can achieve speeds ranging from 22,000 to 100,000 RPM, with energy conversion efficiency far surpassing any engine ever built by humans. The bacterial flagellar motor is a nanoscale machine found in flagellated bacteria, composed of proteins with components functioning similarly to gears, rotors, stators, drive shafts, couplings, and clutches. The motor is powered by the movement of ions across the cell membrane, driven by an electrochemical gradient. With slight modifications to certain proteins, the motor can reverse direction almost instantly or disengage from the propulsion system to allow the bacterium to remain stationary. This motor acts like a propeller, propelling bacteria forward at speeds of up to 60 times their body length per second, a feat comparable to a human sprinting 100 meters in just 1 second.
Yeah, okay. So how exactly it works? Is it a self-caused action, this movement of bacteria? So as I said, now we have these proteins receptors on the boundary, on the cellular membrane, and they interact with chemicals in the environment. And among these chemicals, we could have those which are useful for bacteria, nutrients, and those which are toxic for it and will hurt it and destroy it. So each of these receptors have like two activation modes, right? It activates one way when it touches food and translates activations inside, or it deactivates when it touches toxins. And there are certain enzymes inside the bacteria which carries this information, this reaction, towards the proteins controlling the rotation of the motor, of this engine. And the concentrations of this protein determine the direction of rotation. I could say, how could you have any form of controlled motion using this mechanism? And it's actually a bit weird. So somehow the rotation of the motor in one direction is what moves the bacteria steadily forward. And the rotation in the opposite direction make it like tumble like this. I mean, oscillate, vibrate randomly, change in all directions, changing directions. So depending on what external factors it's exposed to, this concentration of enzymes change, which affect the concentration of proteins here, and will either move forward or oscillate, change direction. So that's kind of the options. Now, what is especially interesting that there is a certain delay in this reaction. In other words, well, even if there could be situations where, let's say, the bacteria is exposed to, a lot of food, so the motor is moving it forward, but eventually the stimuli moving it forward over time decline, and it will stop. So in other words, it has some kind of primitive molecular memory. So this means for the external observer, it might look like the bacteria was moving through nutritious media, in the media filled with nutrients, and then stopped, right? And it kind of makes sense, right? Because if you're in a good environment, you don't want to move out of it. So there are certain mechanisms which allow it to react to the gradients rather than the absolute concentrations. In terms of how the impact is transferred from initial receptors to the regulatory proteins. It basically takes like a biological machinery to take a derivative. Let's think about it this way. So yeah, now we could ask the question again, what's here is like self-generated? Of course, yeah, the rotor is moved by some particles coming from one side, carrying energy. But these particles are directed by these regulatory proteins around inside bacteria. But the proteins are moved themselves by the external receptors with a certain delay, as I explained, which is determined by external environment. So what exactly the word self-causation means, or self-generation? If you look at everything under the microscope, you could trace every action bacteria takes to certain external causes, right? It's just it could be a complicated one, right? It had this RNA inside, or DNA, which by the laws of nature determined to copy itself, right, in a specific environment, um, create corresponding RNA, which then, upon contact with the ribosome, create proteins, and these proteins are such that they build these receptors, these motor regulators, and all the enzymes between them, and they interact with the environment, causing this function. So that's how bacteria works, right? In kind of in its essence. So my question is whether the term self-generating distinguishes any like any entities in the real world. Does it set any actual boundary? It seems like the boundary is only effective, right? It really is if we look from far away and we don't have access to some information, then under certain circumstances, the action of a bacteria appeared self-generated to us. In other words, the actions of a bacteria is not caused by immediate external factors. Because bacteria has this certain memory, it has, first of all the genetic material stored in it, the DNA, which could be copied, and it has this internal enzymes in a certain position which keep rotor, according to this gradient, right, maintained. And if if the gradient decreases, the rotor doesn't stop immediately, right? So it seems like it's just kind of lack of our knowledge. So Ayn Rand, I know, support the idea that every definition only works in a certain context. But it seems like this definition, if I understand it like this directly, it works like in the context of ignorance, which is precisely how effective theories operate. I probably might actually say more about a more complicated life. The next step would be the actual amoeba, and this is the first organism which is so complex we don't really fully understand how its memory works. So we only have really experimental data. So for amoeba, we have the two observations. That first of all, for some reason, it always moves in the electric fields. Towards cathode. And second of all, of course, it moves towards certain peptides, which are food. And what researchers did, they trained amoeba. So amoeba usually would move here, right? But they put a lot of food next to anode on the other side. So the amoeba start to move in its north-south direction from the perspective of electric field. So it start contradict this. And what is especially interesting, that when they removed the food, this is food, for certain periods of time, like 10-20 minutes, amoeba still continue to go to non-standard direction in the electric field. So it somehow remembered the association between anode and food for like 10-20 minutes. So its memory must be even more complex. But we know, it's very simple body. It's very simple organism. So we don't think it's conscious or anything. But its behavior could appear to us to be already quite complicated. And I don't think there are any doubts that the behavior of amoeba can be understood, and the fact that we don't know right now how its memory work could anyhow imply that, it's like fundamentally metaphysically self-generated, or this has like fundamental choice or something like this, right? And we don't think like this. We just think, oh, of course it follows the physical laws. It's so complex we can't really analyze it in its full. Well, wouldn't really analyze it fully and understand it fully yet. And in general, I know in the Michael Lebowitz video, in this discussion, some of his guests wondered, like, how could something which doesn't have free will, perform so complex tasks? And I want just to show several organisms which clearly operate according to very simple deterministic laws, but they can solve complex tasks. So the first one is what's called slime mold. Oh, so let me show you like the first couple of minutes of this video, but I recommend you to watch it fully because it's really fascinating. Just to see what this creature can do.
Society is constantly solving problems, like how to most efficiently move people, resources, energy, and information. Problems that scientists are realizing a single-celled, brainless slime mold might be able to solve better than us. If you've taken a walk through the forest, you may have noticed webs of a yellow substance growing across dead trees and on piles of fallen leaves. Moving at a glacial pace, this slime slowly consumes the microorganisms living on these decaying materials. And while this brainless blob may seem incredibly primitive in its structure, its behavior is another thing entirely. This unique organism is called a slime mold, and as it traverses the forest floor in search of food, it makes decisions based on a complicated trade-off between the risks, its hunger level, and the quality of food patches. It's been shown to demonstrate both learning and memory, and acts in such a clever way that scientists consider it to have a unique form of primitive intelligence. In fact, its abilities are so great that researchers are using its foraging methods to solve real-world optimization problems, such as the shortest path between cities and the most efficient transportation network, challenges that typically require a sophisticated computer algorithm. But the applications for slime molds don't stop there. Scientists are even using them as one of the most essential components in a computer, and are actually building computer chips containing this slimy substance. In a world that's rushing to implement advanced artificial intelligence as the answer to our problems, slime molds show us that some of the best solutions might be hiding in the most primitive places. What even is a slime mold, and how can this simple, brainless blob solve so many problems? Slime molds are mysterious organisms that scientists struggle to classify in the tree of life. because they surprisingly share some of the characteristics present in animals, plants, and fungi. Like social animals, slime molds exhibit swarm intelligence, communication, memory, and learning. However, there is one important difference. Slime molds don't have a brain. Like plants, slime molds have the same structural material in the cell walls of their spores, an organic compound called cellulose. But unlike plants, which famously make their own food through photosynthesis, slime molds get their nutrition from outside sources, making them heterotrophs. Most often, they mistakenly get categorized as fungi, which is the kingdom that includes traditional molds. Like fungi, slime molds are heterotrophs and reproduce by dispersing spores. But unlike fungi, they don't have chitin in their cell walls, they engulf their food instead of digesting it externally, and the primary cell type during their life cycle is diploid, which contains 2 sets of chromosomes instead of just 1, as in a haploid cell, the primary cell type found in fungi. Since they don't quite fit in any of these kingdoms, slime molds are classified as protists.
Okay, so that means, I guess you get the idea. It's basically like a gigantic single cell. They also actually discuss how they form and how they reproduce. It's quite interesting in its own way, because it's just a multiple self, for some reason, self-assemble into just one gigantic one, right, in this big one. And so that it's like a big cells with multiple nucleus, and when they reproduce, they grow this, I don't know how you call this, spores. And within those spores, the cells which are within those spores, they could multiply and spread. And it's very interesting that those who don't end up there, they just die. And that really kind of undermines our view of how symbiosis works. So it seems like we would expect that every symbiosis is a cooperation, and each cell want to replicate itself. But here certain cells just, sacrifice themselves. So yeah.
Through evolutionary head scratchers. Almost always in an organism, the multicellular stage arises from a single cell, a fertilized egg. This ensures that the cells of the organism are derived from a single genotype. All of these cells are on the same team, so to speak. They all agree on the goal of passing down their shared genotype to the next generation. In slime molds, the multicellular stage is a combination of many unrelated genotypes. Viewing these slugs with the same lens of natural selection that we view everything else in the natural world, these different cells with different genotypes that make up the slug are not on the same team. In any given slug, selection favors the cells that take unfair advantage of the altruistic cells. So much so that the selfish types of cells should threaten the existence of any altruists. And yet, both types of cell continue to exist. How this self-sacrificial behavior continues in the face of conditions that should select for its elimination has baffled scientists for years. The other
Yeah, I bet you're interested in this question too. How could altruists not die out?
major type of slime mold belongs to the class Myxogastria.
Yeah, okay, but then how do they actually work? It's pretty simple thing.
Decaying material like wood and leaves in the search for food. They primarily eat the bacteria that feeds on the decaying plant matter, making them an important player in the decomposition process. While searching for food, they send out tendrils in all directions to sense the environment around them. These tendrils are tube-like structures with a gel-like outer membrane. When this vascular network encounters a stimulus, the molecule cyclic AMP is released. This initiates cytoplasmic streaming. This is the flow of cytoplasm inside the cell, driven by the movement of the cytoskeleton. The rate and frequency of the contractions changes when the tendrils encounter an attractant or a repellent. When an attractant is located, which is typically a food source, the rate increases, sending more cytoplasm into the tendril to capitalize on the nutrients and send it back throughout the body of the slime mold. This causes the tendril to grow. The opposite happens when a repellent, like sunlight, is located or nutrients dry up, resulting in the tendrils retracting until they disappear completely. In this way, the slime mold moves towards or away from the source of the stimulus, eventually configuring itself into the most optimized pathway. Watching this optimization process occur, scientists realized these slime molds are capable of solving some complex problems, displaying a remarkable form of intelligence, an intelligence that operates without a brain. When scientists first brought Viscerum polycephalum to the lab, it was simply to study the way it moves. No one thought that it was capable of making choices, never mind choices that seemed well thought out. That is until the year 2000, when researchers in Japan put Viscerum polycephalum to the test in the form of a maze. They chopped up a single specimen and scattered its pieces throughout a plastic maze. They then put 2 food sources at either end of the maze. There were 4 possible routes the plasmodium could take to get from the start and endpoints. First, the plasmodial pieces spread and reconnected to form a single organism that filled the entire maze. After 4 hours, the parts of the plasmodium that occupied dead ends shrank. The remaining part of the plasmodium was then weighing its options, comparing all of the possible connections. After another 4 hours, it selected the shortest path between the food sources. And recently, scientists realized that the way slime mold achieves this is even more complex than they thought. As it crawls through the maze, it leaves behind a trail of slime. Researchers realized that the slime mold will avoid this slime trail, meaning it avoids places it's already traveled, giving it a kind of externalized spatial memory. Since then, scientists have been discovering new applications for Viscerum polycephalum. One of the most common is determining the optimized route between multiple locations. This is known as a combinatorial optimization problem, where there are many solutions, but finding the best, in this case the shortest path, gets more and more difficult as more locations are added. This type of problem often comes up in the fields of AI, software engineering, and applied mathematics, and using a living organism to solve such a problem could offer some interesting insight. A popular example of this is a study published in 2010, where researchers tested the efficiency of Viscerum to recreate a real-world infrastructure network, the Tokyo Rail System. They hypothesized that the slime mold would have been fine-tuned through evolutionary selection, and therefore would be capable of making the same complex trade-offs between cost, transport efficiency, and robustness as a man-made transport network. And that's exactly what they found. On a flat template of the Tokyo region, they placed food on the 36 surrounding cities connected by the rail system and let Viscerum grow freely from the centralized Tokyo location. At first, the slime mold spread out evenly over the food sources, but soon it began to optimize its pattern, leaving only the most efficient network of interconnected nutrient transport tubes. They discovered that Viscerum created a map nearly identical to the real rail system with about the same cost, efficiency, and robustness. In other words, the single-celled brainless slime mold didn't reach for its food sources randomly, becoming satisfied as soon as it had any food. It instead behaved like a team of human engineers, editing, altering, and optimizing the network, creating the most efficient network possible. And this is far from the only optimization problem slime molds have been able to solve.
Okay. Oi. So yeah, that's just an example of how really very simple organism which operates like according to well understood laws, right? It's just chemical reactions which react to external factors, stimuli, make the network either expand or shrink. And that's all. It could solve complex tasks. So whether we could say it's really like self-caused or what. And even a better example of it, if you didn't like the slime mold, is really ants. Because ants also very simple creatures. Each ant is kind of like a robot, which only has a couple of commands, right? It could react to the pheromones left by other ants. It could react to environmental factors. Similarly, it could also react to antenna touches with other ants. They usually work, like, for example, to count the number of ants. Like the worker standing on the door, counts the number of returning workers, and so on. So, and this simple stimuli allow behavior as complex as agriculture and farming, right? As you know, ants engage in the aphid farming. They collect honeydew from aphids, and it's not just like they found them and eat the honeydew whenever they can. No, they defend them from predators. They could move them to fresher plants where they could feed better, and they could even carry the eggs into the nest for the winter. So it's actual farming. And they also have agriculture as well. The famous example is fungus cultivation by a leaf cutter ant. So those ants, they cut leaves, but they don't eat them. They don't eat leaves. What they do with them is they process them into substrate, and then they grow fungi on them, and that's a very difficult process. At first they inoculate them with special symbiotic fungi, which are needed to grow the fungi they actually want. So it's some kind of fungi which kills bad bacteria. Then they have to like take care of the fungi. They have to remove the microbes which are competing with the ones they want, with the fungi they want to kill them. They need to regulate humidity and substrate quality, and basically they build a climate control environment. So that's how complicated the behavior of ants could get when we know that, despite the fact that we know that each ant is really trivial, right? So there is no volition here, no consciousness. It's really just emergent complexity. And multicellular life, like similar to the life similar to us, is really just a cooperation of single cellular ones, which we have already discussed. So in other words, the conclusion from all of it is that teleology is really an emergent property. I was talking about all this organism, like, already in this teleological language. I was saying ants want this fungi, or slime mold want these nutrients, or amoeba want these nutrients, right? But as Ayn Rand said that, you don't have to think about them teleologically, strictly speaking, and you still have the same properties. This is just, a convenient term which we introduced. yeah, so the question then becomes whether humans are not that much different from everything we discussed right now. Could it be that humans are just way more complicated biological machines, basically, way more complicated robots? And of course, as I partially discussed in the previous video, I don't know for sure, right? Because we can't understand humans as well as we understand slime mold. But I don't see how exactly the laws of physics can be violated there, and why would expect them to be violated, and in what sense. So my hypothesis, yes, that humans are basically robots, yeah. But we shouldn't be surprised by the complexity of their behavior. Like the complexity of behavior of ants do not surprise us. Now this is kind of usually in people's minds lead to questions about like morality and how morality then can work. And I would say, well, similarly to how we work with any effective theory, let's start with this amoeba or bacteria. We know it's fully deterministic, so could we say that, yeah, okay, it doesn't have any morality? Well, you could choose to refuse to define this term, right? But it doesn't mean that there's no analysis possible here. We could still ask the same question. If we have ensemble of bacteria, some of the bacteria will die faster than others, right? What factors determine which of them died faster and which of them died slower? We could investigate this question. Well, some bacteria accidentally chewed up some toxins which destroyed it. So now we know, oh, okay, toxins are bad for bacteria. Toxins are anti its life. Some bacteria was able to eat more nutrients and grow bigger and stronger and moved further. So we say our nutrients, it's pro-life. So it's good for bacteria to grab those nutrients. It still works in deterministic universe, all this analysis. So if we use the life as a standard of morality, the notion of life will still exist. Again, I don't know whether we could define exactly like Ayn Rand defined it, but you could use the standard biological definition, even if it's ugly. It still, yeah, makes sense. There is this some process which continues inside the living organism, and it stops when they die. So the life might be hard to define, but it can be defined. And together with it, attached to it, the notion of morality exists as well. And it could be applied to any biological organism, no matter how complicated it is. So for humans, it works the same way. In other words, if somebody like will tell you, well, if the world is fully deterministic, does it mean that we should start releasing violent criminals on the street because they're not really responsible for their actions? And if you reformulate this question properly using the term morality, right? Is it moral to realism? Is it good to realism, right? And you use the definition which we introduced right now. The answer will be no. It's not good, right? Think about this amoebas, right? What would happen to them, right? Amoebas who did this died. That's kind of a statement of a fact, right? Now, somebody could object and say, well, you define morality in such a way that it is attached to sustainment of this organism life. But why you choose to define it this way? I could have defined it differently. I could have said that, well, no, the standard should be the ability to reproduce. We really see that what RNA is doing, it's just replicating itself. And the same holds for any life. And whether each particular organism dies or not, it doesn't really matter. It matters whether it has passed a gene to future generations. Or somebody could say, well, but look at this example with slime mold in this multiple cells merging into one, and these altruistic cells which really don't pass on the genetic information to the future. They clearly sacrifice themselves for the I don't know, the prosperity of the bigger organism. So maybe we could think about humans in the same way, or that humans are really part of society, and really the morality should be defined in a collectivistic way, some sort of utilitarian fashion, that your actions are good if they help sustain the life of a society as a whole, something like this, right? And well, yeah, I don't object to the fact that people could define all these notions. My point is that the definition of term itself doesn't change reality. And yeah, you could argue about reality in the same way. You just need to specify your terms clearly. Like if we're talking about the amoeba eating toxins, being immoral for it, yeah, we meant, yeah, it hurts its life. If you want to use morality in a different sense, yeah, well, you could always unpack it by saying like, oh, this cell did something which is not helpful for the organism as a whole, right? It behaved immorally in this collective sense. So yeah, you could define these notions the way you want, but the analysis doesn't really change. The physical phenomena behind them doesn't change. You could ask different questions. You could ask whether the action of this particular individual or organism help to sustain its life, and which actions do this, which actions help to sustain the life of organism as a whole. That's kind of the questions available. I could say it's a really kind of weak position. I'm not trying to like answer any of this question here, right? It's a question of separate sciences, right? Like how to live your life better if you want to live longer, for example, or happier, or what kind of economic system we want to have if we want a society to exist longer, or what kind of economic system I want to live in if I want to live longer, right? They're just different questions we could ask. So I'm open to discuss any of them, right? The only thing which annoys me is that some people try to use the physics and the notion of determinism to try to cancel these questions. That's the only position which considered to be unequivocally invalid. Oh, that if determinism holds, then the morality, that's all, it couldn't exist, it doesn't make sense, right? Well, just that's not true. Okay, so I guess it's kind of enough. We discussed the definition as I promised. Whether it makes sense or not is really for you to decide, depending on what words exactly mean in it. But I guess you get the idea of how living organisms work. So, well, thank you for attention. See you next time.